So welcome to another episode of Reflections, the Wisdom of Edgar Cayce. I'm Peter Woodbury, your host, and today we'll be bringing on Gregg Unterberger. He's a friend, very dynamic person, very creative. He's a regressionist, a psychotherapist. He's written a book called The Quickening, which is about looking at Cayce's readings and interpolating with other modalities and techniques to advance your spiritual work in a quicker way than you might think is normally possible. He is an avid speaker for us around the country, and he also does his own programs. He does an annual program in Zion, Utah. So without further ado, let's bring on Gregg Unterberger. So hi, Gregg. How are you today?
I'm well. Good to see you, Peter.
Good to see you too. It's been a while. I think the last time I saw you, you were here at a New Year's conference.
Yes, I think so. And I think you were doing your Edgar Cayce Evening with Edgar, and I absolutely love that.
Oh, so, thank you. That's a nice.
I can't hear anybody say, "Oh, really?" without thinking of you and Edgar now, because of course Edgar was a bit naive, so you say, and that's what he said a lot when someone would tell a whopper, believe it.
Yeah. My favorite thing from doing the Cayce play is people say, Peter must be channeling because he's coming across so intelligent and so eloquent. And I know Peter, he must be channeling. That's not him, so it's a kind of...
Yeah, you're not quite sure whether that's a compliment or not.
No, it's like a backhanded compliment. But so how are things going with you? How are you, what's up with your research and your work, and where should we start?
Well, it's been a whirlwind the last couple of months. I just came back. I did Boston just about a month ago, and some wonderful folks there, and then Manhattan, and then Zion Canyon, Utah, and then I literally just got back yesterday from Atlanta, and some wonderful folks down there. So it's just really exciting to be around the country representing Edgar.
Good. And then your program, you have different programs, but your book is titled The Quickening. And it's about activating your spiritual development. Tell us a little bit about that work and kind of what that entails.
Well, Edgar sort of talks out of both sides of his mouth, strangely. On one hand, he says there's no shortcuts to God, and it's line upon line, precept upon precept. On the other hand, he talks about this thing. He says that all men must be quickened. Sudden acceleration of spirit in the body or in the consciousness as it moves forward on the journey, and that's necessary, and that it's not only necessary, but it's possible with an openness and a willingness and an awareness on the part of the spiritual seeker to greatly accelerate their spiritual journey. He says things like in one reading, like a moment spent at the feet of the master is worth years in the tents of the wicked, which is something worth bearing in mind the next time you go camping as well. It would suggest that things can progress much more quickly than we would traditionally think.
Yeah.
And when you think about it, we've all had these profound spiritual experiences at one point in our life. And, where one day we were operating at one level and then the next day at a whole other level. And it didn't come from study or a search for God. That may have all been part of building up to it. But at some point we made this sudden jump or this sudden leap, and we're operating at a whole nother level. And so then the question begs the question, how can we have more of those? If what we're on the planet is to take on our karmic journey and move ahead faster, what's the fastest and best way to get there? And so the quickening offers approaches that you can take deliberately to accelerate your spiritual journey.
And then is that using like meditation and regression, and what are some of the other techniques that are involved in that?
Right. Well, each of the chapters in the book, roughly speaking, offer different approaches. Many people have heard of binaural beat frequencies or hemisync, which can catalyze a state of consciousness as deep as the Tibetan monk that has been working, meditating for 20 years. By listening to headphones on the very first attempt, can begin to drop you down and have you meditating at a very deep level. You mentioned past life regression. You do a lot of regression work yourself, and of course, you are well known, Peter, for your trainings. I've talked to some students who rave about your course. And you know from your experience that when people get regression, sometimes there's a phenomenal shift. They suddenly understand why they fell in love with someone, or why there's been a long hatred in a family with a family member. There are other techniques that are discussed in the book. A kind of trauma technique that's used by the Veterans Administration called EMDR to resolve trauma in a very quick form. So that we can let go of grievances and move on with our lives. And then a couple of techniques that I've developed, one called spiritual activation, that allows us to go back to a prior spiritual experience and recatalyze the state with the potential to even go deeper and further than the original experience, which is just mind-blowing to me.
Oh, wow.
You know, think about the most amazing experience you ever had in your life, and what if you could go back and have it again and have it be deeper and more clear and have more insight about it.
And so when people come to one of your workshops, do you lead them in this process, like a group kind of meditation or group experience where they can recall these experiences and then reactivate them and then shift?
In the program called Spiritual Advancement, Quickening Your Soul's Growth Path, I think it's called, one of the things that I do is I actually teach spiritual activation. I have people pair off and do the exercise and strengthen the memory of that core spiritual experience that they want to recatalyze. And very often they strengthen it by 20 or 40% and relive aspects or elements of it. And it's just kind of a sampler. Obviously, that's not going to be as effective as really taking a lot of time and practicing the technique. But even on first attempt, people are getting results. In Atlanta this last weekend, probably 70 or 80% re-encountered their original experience and strengthened it.
Oh, nice. And then,
nice. Do you people in the audience are sitting there? You can see them, Kundalini energy moving through their body and tears streaming down people's faces. So, hey, another day at the office, right?
Oh, yeah, that's great. I see that a lot, but it's usually they're going for the refund line.
I doubt that very much, Peter, but very funny.
Now, when you go out on speaking on behalf of the A.R.E., do you stay on after a conference and work with people individually? So they can meet up with you.
I stay in and book 3-hour sessions. They're intensive. But they're an opportunity for people to experience a quickening immediately. In that 3-hour block, we can usually accomplish something pretty deep and fairly profound. No pressure there, Greg. Wrote a book called Quickening, chop, chop, let's go. I got 3 hours, make it happen. But actually we come together and we really do. These are very powerful techniques we're using. So sometimes a regression or a spiritual activation, someone can relive the prior spiritual experience. Sometimes we will dissolve a chunk of trauma. Someone's been carrying guilt or sadness over a divorce. I also do a unique technique called induced after-death communication. That was actually, this is fascinating, Peter, it's developed by doctors at the Chicago Veterans Administration. And they were doing therapy with their clients, and spontaneously, these clients report having contact with the other side.
Now, I remember you're one of 15 people that are trained in this technique, something like that, or?
Yes, sir. I was actually the 15th person in the world to become certified in it. It's popular in the United States, but it's really taken over in Europe, where they're not so worried about woo-woo. But we can actually take an individual, and I don't act as a medium, but I actually induce a state of consciousness, which is not hypnosis. Where that individual has the potential to make contact with somebody who's crossed over. The client themselves will have an internal visionary experience where they will feel the presence of another person that has crossed. Sometimes there's conversations. Sometimes the client will report being hugged or touched or kissed. Those are profound and beautiful. Sometimes it's highly symbolic. Sometimes it's just the person sitting there with their eyes closed, having a conversation with, oh, Bill, oh, you said that when we were alive. Don't be silly. Yes, of course I still love you. You know, a 30-minute conversation with their eyes closed, and they're conversing with the person who crossed. And these people are not mediums, and they have not done this kind of thing professionally or attempted it before, but we can induce this state where they can have direct contact. And the vast majority of people, over 90% of these people say, this experience is real. Now, that's not proof in any scientific way that it is, but it suggests that they're profoundly moving, and they're certainly healing, which of course is the bottom line. Do you feel better? Do you feel more clear? Do you feel more resolved about the loss of this person on the other side of therapy? And inevitably they do.
Well, that's great. So it sounds like in those 3-hour sessions, you have quite a toolkit of what you can work with the different people according to what their issue is. You can do a regression, or you can do this contact with a deceased loved one, or trauma resolutions. I think it's really what the work that I'm doing is. I find that that's really what people need. They need those. Houston Smith said one of the things most lacking in modern society are transcendent experiences. And one of the most important things for the soul is having those transcendent experiences. So I think that there's really a lot of space. People are hungry for transcendence, and not so much through drug-induced experiences, but that we're wired for that ourselves, and that through these different techniques.
We may seek that in love, romantic relationships, a transcendent sense of self, or in alcohol or drug use, that we seek those out. There's a wonderful book called Cayce in Context. I don't know if you've ever read it, Peter. It's pretty wordy and pretty heavy. I think it was written as a thesis.
Oh, who wrote it?
Boy, I'm blanking out right now. I knew you were going to ask me that.
That's okay. So it's a book called Cayce in Context?
Cayce in Context. And it's a very even-handed look at where Cayce got it right and where Cayce was in error. It's not biased at all, but it's willing to say, Cayce wasn't exactly right here, but boy, we did nail it here. It's very even-handed.
Well, his sons did a book. His sons wrote the book.
Paul Johnson. I'm sorry?
What was the author's name?
K. Paul Johnson.
They Paul Johnson.
Okay, yeah, K, like...
K. Paul.
Spirits.
Okay.
K. Paul Johnson. And Johnson says, he looks at the totality of the Cayce readings, and he says the heart of the Cayce readings, the spiritual message, was that people could seek the divine directly, and it encouraged them to reclaim the connection, the direct connection between the individual and God. And of course, Jesus was this radical that said, you don't need to come to God through the church or through the church hierarchy. You can come to God directly.
Yes.
And Hugh Lynn Cayce also, in his book, Venturing Inward, I guess it's been retitled and published by the A.R.E. And in that book, he says, talks about, everyone has had these experiences of listening to a babbling brook, or being by the ocean, or looking into the eyes of a beloved and feeling a transcendent sense of who they are, or a sudden flash of lightning, or a bird that seems to be singing just for you. And he says, one such experience can change your entire life and make this whole confusing melee here meaningful. One such experience. So Hugh Lynn really emphasizes these kinds of transcendent experiences too. And this is not, just so we're clear, this is not to take anything away from doing regular study of the Bible, or the Search for God material, or Course in Miracles, the line upon line precept. They're not mutually exclusive. It's not either or. But you sort of do your homework, and then along the way you have these profound transcendent experiences. And as Carl Jung would say, I don't believe in God. I know there's God because I've experienced him directly.
Yes. Yes. And what I've found is that that with the regressions, or whatever you want to call it, when people reconnect with the divine, that sometimes they're not given everything at once. It's like the divine really wants to establish a regular relationship. And so, like you're saying, sometimes a person has trouble meditating, and then in a regression, in a whatever you want to call it, they get into such a deep state and they get a lot from it. But sometimes it's almost like will you keep coming back? And that's what I hope. That's what's real clear to me, is that it shouldn't be necessarily just a one-time thing. That we need here in the world. It's so easy to get caught up in the nonsense that we just almost like need. It's almost like if you turn inward and you have a transcendent experience, you're more likely to do it again. You're more likely to do it in a week or in a couple, or make it a regular practice. And so I think that's been some of my experiences, that we can catalyze these deep experiences. And then the hope is that the person is like, you don't work out just once, but you start to incorporate that into your practice, and you kind of you maintain it. And in a way, I say it gets us out of business, because it's like they learn how to do it themselves, and they don't have to keep coming to a regressionist to do it with them each time. I feel like it's important where two or more gather, you kind of facilitate a process. But then once they've walked that path, then it becomes up to them if they're going to, make that path into a highway or not. It's like, is it going to stay a little walkway in the grass, or is it slowly going to become broadened?
Well, if you think about this from a biological level, the psychologist Donald Hebb said the neurons that fire together are wired together.
Yes.
And if you think about part of what's exciting about spiritual activation, for example, is when we meditate, we are practicing firing those neural networks, and we get better and better at it.
Yes.
There's a reason why 20 years later, after we learn to ride a bike, that we can get on a bike and still ride it, because there's a superhighway of thought that is well established in Peter's brain and in Gregg's brain.
Mm-hmm.
And literally on Ocracoke Island about 5 years ago, I got on a bike for the first time in 20 years, and I got a little wobbly at first, but I could do that.
Yeah.
And so the more we think a certain way, then the more we think a certain way. So the more we practice meditation, and we fire those neural networks together, then the easier it becomes to drop down into that awakened state. And so things like binaural beat frequencies, also known as hemisync, which are the headphones that you can listen to with the tones in them, detuned tones, that will help your brain get down to a state, or just regular practice of meditation. You start replaying those networks over and over. Spiritual activation can do the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
We use eye positions to trigger what are called brain spots, or neural networks in the brain associated with spirituality. And then we just fire them over and over and over again. And so it's like riding a bike over and over and over again. And then the idea would be, as I say in the book, wouldn't it be cool if we could hardwire our brain to God? That neural network was so established, we could just close our eyes and drop in there. And Edgar had specific rituals that he did before he went into trance, but he knew how to start the car and get into that state.
Well, it reminds me of Rick Hanson's work with Buddha's brain.
Yes.
And he talks about how we're physiologically, we're more hardwired for war than we are for love. Yes. And so our biology is really about threat and protection. And so we have to really create neural networks for long-term love and long-term relationships. So it's odd what you're saying. It's like
chakra issues.
Yeah, it's like
first we got to stay alive, then I'll worry about the rest.
Yeah. So the Buddha mind, or the Christ mind, is really it's a non-biological reality. It's a spiritual reality that we kind of have to entrain into the body.
Agreed.
But I know our listeners, when you said that about the book Cayce in Context, I know they're thinking, well, what did Cayce get wrong? What does the author highlight? What are some of the things that the author felt Cayce was a little bit off on?
Well, even Hugh Lynn and Edgar Evans Cayce, Edgar's sons, wrote a book called The Outer Limits of Edgar Cayce's Power.
Yes.
And they estimate that Edgar was only 85% correct in the readings. And I think, and I'm coming up on blasphemous material here, but I think we have to take Edgar off a pedestal and say, hey, this was a human being, and he had good days and bad days. Mm-hmm. Both as a human being and also in his ability to channel. But the medical readings are, from what I remember from the book, are wildly accurate. Mm-hmm. Whereas some of the predictions that Edgar made, not so much.
Yeah, I think that what I remembered, I think that was some of the like the earth change stuff. I mean, mm-hmm. Those were. I mean, I know the earth change readings that he gave were channeled. It was Heliel. That is the archangel of karma, and sometimes we feel that was exaggerated to get people's attention, but I think there was the work that I think we focus on is the spiritual work of Edgar Cayce, and I think that's it's not like you can't factually prove whether these sorts of things. So it's more like it's in your own research and your own experience. For some people. Yes. It proves itself.
And I profoundly resonate with that, and I think most people do.
Yeah.
And from a spiritual perspective, I don't think there's a lot of doubt that Cayce was way ahead of his time with integrating a lot of Eastern ideas with mainstream Christianity.
Oh yeah, very holistic.
And making it acceptable because he was such a committed Christian.
And you're right. I think it's good to, with Hugh Lynn and Edgar Evans's the book, like you mentioned, The Outer Limits of Edgar Cayce, to know that it's Edgar Cayce was a man. It's like he was bringing in, I think, high vibrational or divine material. And I think sometimes it was clear that his vehicle, like if he was agitated, if he hadn't slept well, that it influenced, like he gave that reading one time for somebody who was actually dead. And so he was giving so many readings at that time that he didn't pick up that the person was actually deceased, or maybe he was tuning into the body before the person passed away. But they realized that, and he knew, I think, that he was told to only do 2 or 3 a day. And I think when he went outside of that bound, that it just became, like any of us, it's like, if I'm seeing one client a day, there's a much different energy than if I'm on my 7th one. It's about the quality of attention that happens. And when you're trying to do high spiritual work, you really are the vehicle for that. And our vehicles are very sensitive, that sort of way. So I think good, we haven't offended anybody by humanizing.
I think we need to maintain, it's not, again, we want to get past black or white thinking, that's a common issue for people in therapy a lot, you're either for us or against us kind of thing.
Yeah.
And instead it's like, and also, and Edgar was, in his personal life, was often a phenomenal example of an awakened Christian. And in other moments was swept away by feeling like he had to sacrifice himself. And so you've got him giving 7 or 8 readings when the source itself is saying, stop it already. And I told you 2 or 3, what are you doing here?
Mm-hmm.
So Edgar kind of got caught up in that need to sacrifice himself. Mm-hmm. And interestingly, in the readings, for those that are listening that are in recovery from codependency, Cayce says service, not sacrifice, is required of all those who would serve the Lord. Mm-hmm. So there's a sense of, yes, we are our brother's keeper, but we're also our own keeper. Yes. We have to find balance.
Yes.
We're not going to do anybody any good. Like they say on the airplanes, when the oxygen mask drops, you put on yours first, right. and then the child, then the next one is the child you like best.
Right. Well, like what you were, I got caught with that thought, just about. The most common ending to a Cayce reading, because he would get readings for himself, it would be good luck getting him to do any of this, because it would have all the dietary recommendations. We know he smoked, he was a heavy smoker, and so he was told to try to balance those things out. And like you said, the man, Edgar Cayce, had his own impulses and his own, and I think, he so idealized Jesus, that that Jesus gave his life for his friends, and I think in that ideal that's what Edgar Cayce felt he was doing, that he was giving his life.
And well, it's touching. His motivation, his intention is touching and certainly beautiful.
But the readings did say that if he took better care of himself, he could live to be 100. So you think about for all of us how we apply that. Like if I'm working, seeing 7, 8 people a day. Am I going to serve a lot of people, but in a shorter time? Like if Edgar Cayce had paced it, would he have given more readings and helped more people if he had balanced it out? So I think that's a legacy of Cayce for all of us, he might not have personally demonstrated a kind of balance that hopefully people are picking up, in this new age, or with the work that you're helping them see, kind of what self-sacrificing, I think also, since we're moving from the Piscean age, which is the age of self-sacrifice, the Pisces, it's one of the detrimental sides of that sign, and moving into the Aquarian age, maybe there's a movement away from that, that maybe more, not self-sacrifice, but moving into love of humanity and ourselves included in that, and more of a balance in that.
Yes.
So there's some nice potentials in that for all of us. But let's just backtrack a little bit. Where did you learn about Edgar Cayce? How did Edgar Cayce come into your spiritual vocabulary?
Well, it's funny. You may know, and I've certainly met on the road lots of people that started out in a more restrictive or narrow religious background. Mm-hmm. And they'll say things like, "I'm a recovering Baptist" or something, or a recovering Catholic or whatever.
Yes.
I was very fortunate, and I used to tease my mom that I chose her as my mother and my father as my father at a soul level.
So were they
And
into Cayce? Like, did you?
I sort of grew up with the Cayce
Oh, I
material.
see. Okay, good.
Yeah, and my mother was interested in the Alice Bailey work and had a union therapist when I was a young boy in California, and then discovered Edgar Cayce when I was in about 7th grade. And Peter, I was supposed to go to my first dance. Oh my God, I was going to be able to actually hold a girl close to me. And it was a 7th grade dance. And here's my mother. She's dragging me off to some half crazy thing, a statewide conference with some guy named Hugh Lynn Cayce, you know, and the A.R.E.
Oh, you had to miss the dance to go here at
I
Hugh
was
Lynn?
heartbroken. I was so
Yeah.
pissed. And I get drug out, and I absolutely feel like I'm coming home.
Mm-hmm.
These amazing, loving beings I was absolutely struck by the Cayce material.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess I'd heard about the idea of reincarnation before, but having explained, it's like, well, of course, it makes perfect sense that we would reincarnate. And why didn't somebody tell me this? And everybody was so kind and loving. I literally felt like I had come home and I'd forgotten all about the dance. And
were there other young people there?
Sorry?
Were there other young people there? People your age?
It was a statewide conference in Palestine, Texas.
Ah.
I think it's been going on for like 40
Yes,
years.
yes.
Uh-huh.
It's still going on.
There before, a lot of people you don't think of as a knee jerk as like, ooh, Texas, an enlightened state. I thought these are the people. The idea of spirituality was yeehaw. But people forget, of course, about the Cayce Oil Company and about.
Careful,
Cayce.
we have viewers in Texas, or anyway.
Yeah, no, I'm from Texas. So, but I mean, we don't normally. It's not a knee jerk that you would think, oh, Texas, an enlightened state. You
right.
Cowboy hats and 6 guns and kind of rough around the edges. But
right.
Of course, Cayce came down for the Cayce Oil Company and gave lots of readings, and so.
He seeded something there when he was down there with the oil stuff.
Very strong. And Texas is a big state, and that helps too.
Yeah.
But it's always had a very strong component for years. There's been.
I didn't know that.
A statewide conference where 100+ people show up every single year.
Oh yeah, there's center. Like we go to Houston, Dallas, San Antonio, Austin, and then Palestine. So there's a lot of action going on in Texas. You're right.
Yeah, but you wouldn't expect it at first blush, but it's always been there. So yeah, I absolutely fell in love with the Cayce material. It made more sense to me. And I was talking with when I was in Atlanta, I was talking with the area coordinator Deborah, and one of the things that we said, and I can't emphasize this enough, is when you're with A.R.E. people, you feel at home. There's an openness and a kindness and a sense of we want you to be a part of this work. And almost an excitement like, oh, you're one of us, you're interested in Cayce, so am I. You believe in reincarnation. Oh, finally, there's someone that I can speak freely about this kind of thing without thinking that someone's going to think that I'm weird or strange. And I think that is Deborah and I were talking, and we said, this is one of the most powerful things about the A.R.E. is that people can come together and they can join together and share their spiritual experiences without feeling judged, and learn and grow from each other. And that is one reason why I think study groups are so important. And also, at the risk of sounding self-serving, Peter, the work that you do and I do and other field presenters would come together for a day, and there's this wonderful joining.
Yes.
And people often make lifelong friends at these workshops that we present. And it's just so exciting to know that we're not alone in this work. Because I think a lot of people do feel cut off from other spiritual seekers.
Yeah, you're right. It's like when we go and do a conference, it becomes like a little reunion, and people get to even just a day. I know they have the weekend ones, which are even more intense.
Yes, sir.
So, yes, that's always. Now, how did you get involved with hypnosis through the Cayce, knowing that he would go into trance? Is that what interested you in?
I was fascinated by that, but like you, I had read Dr. Brian Weiss's book, Many Lives, Many Masters.
Yes.
And so about 20 years ago, I went and trained with Brian, and subsequently did some additional workshops with him. And I'm actually featured in Brian's book, Miracles Happen.
Ah.
My case studies are in that, and I was absolutely honored and thrilled. one of the things that's wonderful about doing this work is you get to meet your heroes.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're lucky, you get to train with them. And of course, you're certified by Brian as well, yes?
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah, wonderful man. Really
Yes.
spiritual man.
Won't you just love Brian? All you have to do, hello.
Yeah, he's like, I'm already in trance.
Brian's amazing. I was watching Dana Carvey
Mm-hmm.
on one of the talk shows, and he was doing all these imitations, and he said, most of the people that I imitate, I'm really excited about, but here's this guy, and I'm going to call him Brian. And I went, oh my God. And he said, hello, I'm Brian. So good to see you.
Oh, he was doing Brian Weiss?
He was doing Brian Weiss. He didn't call him Brian Weiss, but it was a hoot to see him imitate Brian. So I know what you're up to.
When you went to his class, was he teaching with his wife?
Yes, Carol.
Because I remember she gets up on stage, and she's not energetically the same as him, and she says, okay, I know what your questions are. Yes, he is always like that at home. Makes me look like a raving lunatic. Because he's always so balanced and calm.
She tells a wonderful story. Carol Weiss is Brian's wife, and she's also a therapist and certified, and does regression work for those of you that are new to it. And she sometimes teaches alongside of Brian, and she tells a great story about Brian would try and hypnotize her when he first got into the work.
Yeah.
And he'd go, and you're getting more and more relaxed. And Carol would just burst into laughter and just crack up, and she couldn't, because it was Brian.
Yeah.
And so she said, as you probably guess, I'm a pretty pragmatic person. So I went to this so-called past life regression therapist. And, her office was all, crystals and candles. And Carol's going like, and she said, but I went along for the ride, and she's giving me all these instructions. And I'm thinking she's using this Mr. Rogers sing-song voice, and I'm about ready to throw up. And she says, step out of the mist and go into another lifetime and all this. And Carol said, all of a sudden, I'm being chased by a mob, and I'm being beaten with these sticks, and I'm being thrown stones at me, and I'm clutching my head. And then she said, and I realized I was having a regression even though I didn't like this woman. And she said, and all of a sudden, migraines, which had been a weekly occurrence for 20 years, disappeared from my life after I had that memory.
Oh yeah, I tell every regressionist just has to develop their own style, and 80% of people, it'll work. It's like as long as your heart's in the right place, the the color of your office and all that kind of stuff is secondary. Well, that's a neat story. But I want to hear about you do a program in Zion, and I guess you've been doing it for almost 20 years, and it's an annual event. Tell us a little bit about it, and then. Do you have a personal website? Can people find you?
My website is GreggUnterberger.com. So it's just my name, visual aids, GreggUnterberger, Unterberger, GreggUnterberger.com.
So Gregg with 2 G's.
Yes, sir.
And then Unterberger.
Yeah. And
that's a mouthful. That must be. You probably have to buy a couple of different domains to get all the people trying to reach you.
Just cram it all in, right? So,
Unter Hamburger.
I told my mom, I said, Mom, I have a website. She said, that's nice, dear. I said, yeah, it's GreggUnterberger.com. I came up with it all by myself. And she laughed and she said, no, you didn't.
You needed family.
She named me, right? So, so a little bit about Zion Canyon. Just sort of northwest of the Grand Canyon, about an hour and a half, 2 hours, is an amazing place called Zion Canyon National Park, and it's in Utah.
Yeah.
The setting is spectacular. The canyon starts several miles wide with 3,000 to 7,000 foot walls that are this rich orange and white and maroon patina all over them, and then it eventually narrows to 18 inches. And all cut by the crystal clear Virgin River that runs through it. So this is a spectacular setting. It's a wonderful park. And I discovered it in 1999. And when I first drove through the park, I started spontaneously weeping. And I realized I had this really deep and powerful connection to the park, but I did not know what that was. And in a spiritual workshop, I had a past life memory where I had been a tribal shaman there. And I don't know for a fact that it was Zion, but it was in that area of the country. But I got a feeling it really was Zion.
Yeah.
And so in 2000, I started leading annual workshops there.
So they have like a retreat center there, or they have a
No,
hotel?
we are based in a hotel, and then we have a hotel meeting area, and then the park is just minutes away. And the format of the workshop is it's 4 days, and we meet Thursday evening, and then Friday morning, Saturday morning, and Sunday morning for about 4 or 5 hours. And so that allows us to do some really nice, intense group work in a small setting. Usually there's no more than about 20 people. And then you get to go play in the canyon and explore the canyon the rest of the day. And people obviously make friends and hook up. There's wonderful food in the area, and all kinds of cool shops with Native American art as well, golf courses, and of course, amazing hikes, from everything from flat hikes that are a piece of cake. You don't have to be Arnold Schwarzenegger to scale the sheer cliffs there, and there's that kind of thing too. So a variety.
Oh, what
of
a
ways.
neat thing! What a neat experience.
Yeah, and it's called the Zion Canyon Retreat, the Heart of Forgiveness, and we just completed our 19th year here a couple of weeks ago. So this year we'll be back in Zion Canyon again on the 20th, and we draw on material from the Cayce material, of course. And Cayce said that the person who forgives is Lord and Master even over the one that he forgives. Beautiful a sense of that. We also draw on material from A Course in Miracles, which Hugh Lin was a huge fan of, and is very, very similar to the Cayce material. We also use research from Dr. Fred Luskin, who did work at Stanford to explore the Stanford Forgiveness Project and the kinds of hardcore research that he did to show what really works and what doesn't in terms of being able to forgive people. Because everybody tells us, oh, you should forgive if you're a good Christian, and everybody says, I'd probably feel better if I could, but nobody tells us how.
Yeah.
We want to, but it's like, but I really hate to, how do I let go of this grudge, or what will it mean if I do? And so we really dig deep. Yeah. This is not a note-taking kind of, that's fascinating, Greg. I'll have to give that a shot next year. I mean, we go deep and we get into the thick of things about what forgiveness is about. And these are powerfully transformative 4-day workshops. At the end of them, no one wants to leave. It's like the place is so beautiful.
That's nice.
All of a sudden, these strangers come together and they feel very, very close to each other.
That's great.
And it kind of makes sense that people have often joked that holding a grudge is like lighting yourself on fire and hoping the other person dies of smoke inhalation.
Good way to put it. And so do you get people coming each year? Like, do you get people that have been coming for 19 or 20 years?
Some people have returned, others do not, and lots of A.R.E. people, and some of my clients from workshops around the country as well.
Oh, good. Good. And then what about, what are you working on now? Is there anything in the Cayce readings that's particularly drawing your interest, that you're researching?
Well, I think more than anything else, I'm looking at working with spiritual activation, because a lot of people have said, are you going to do a certification? Spiritual, in my book, The Quickening, I actually give instructions as to how to do it at home. Not all the techniques are ones that can be done that are unfacilitated. And I would remind people that say, well, that's not right, or that's not fair, that Cayce sent plenty of people to go to a chiropractor or a specific doctor. And Cayce also recommended suggestions for what people might be able to do at home in terms of diet that they were totally in control of, and no one was required to assist them. And the same thing with the techniques in the quickening. Some of them require a skilled facilitator and others do not. But spiritual activation, this technique by which you recatalyze a prior spiritual experience, you can help induce your friends to do that too. It can be done for other people. You can act as a facilitator. So I've had a lot of curiosity about that, and saying,
oh, that sounds great.
I'd really like to get some more training in that.
Would it be like a week-long course you're thinking of?
Yeah, so I'm thinking about setting up a certification that would allow people to maybe a 3-day training, and we do a lot of spiritual activation. So, I mean, it'd be really exciting and rich. When you and I trained with Brian Weiss, even though we trained separately, I'm sure as part of that training, you induced regression in a lot of other people, induced hypnosis, and took them back. And also you get to be in the receiving end.
Mm-hmm.
And so as I'm seeing this certification, it would include lots of experiences that are really juicy.
Yeah.
We'll explore what mysticism is, what the power of mystical experience, the dangers, when we need to shut it down so we don't want to harm anybody. And then they would leave with a certification that would allow them to do this work in a more formal or professional fashion.
Sounds great.
And so that other people could deepen and catalyze their prior spiritual states.
Well, I hope you approach A.R.E. with that. That you approach that, because the A.R.E. offers several certification programs. I do 2. I do life coaching and regression hypnosis. John does a meditation one. So this sounds like it could be something that would be a nice fit. So anyway, maybe you'll pilot it.
Kevin Tedeschi, are you listening? Got your ears on?
Well, he only listens when it crosses his table, so you'll have to submit it.
Well, I'll make sure that it gets spit
But
across.
maybe pilot it a couple of times and then bring it here once you feel like you've worked out. I mean, with the courses I've taught, it takes a couple of years to figure out. It's always this continuous quality improvement.
Yes,
like the regression class, I love it, but it took about even this last year. I think I've been doing it 8 years. We're still tinkering with it. We're still adding new things. We're listening to the feedback of the students to kind of maximize it. But and also don't offer it in October so that I can attend it.
Well, I've talked with several people that have been certified by you, and they certainly rave about your class.
Oh, thank you.
If you guys are watching and you are the least bit interested, even if it's just something that you would like to do, with friends or family members, or because you're curious about it, take Peter's class. I can only imagine that you'll A, really enjoy it, B, you'll get an opportunity to do lots of regressions and have lots of memories. And that's a bargain, because if you hire a therapist to do it, it can get, honestly, it can be a little pricey. But I'm guessing part of your training is you both teach people to induce and also
yes.
play patient.
They leave with, they've been regressed 3 times by a student. Sometimes they come up on stage and then they've regressed someone 3 times. So they leave. The first day that they're practicing, they're all intimidated. But by the 3rd day, you see that they've gotten the hang of it. But one of the things here,
it is a skill, but it's not rocket science. It's not.
No, it's the course gives people
have some magic amulet that makes it possible. It is a very trainable skill.
No, people get that, they get comfortable with it because it demystifies it and makes it practical. But one of the things you'll find, and when you teach here, is we have this guy named Kevin Grant, and he, the stuff we can do with the way that technology can support what you're doing. It's like we got this Oprah Winfrey set, the person being regressed, we put them on the television so the whole class can see the person's face, and then I can get in the back of the room and I can type and it comes on the screen, so people can go into what I'm thinking as a student is regressing another student. So the technology really supports the work here. And then I have Winona Slaughter, wonderful assistant, and Maya Nikitovich. So I hope you come and become part of the way that teaching is facilitated here is very, very special. I teach smaller groups on the road, but it's good because you get a more intimate group. But here you get that big, the big Hollywood production. Maybe Hollywood's not the right word, but you get that.
Well, it's professional and it's up to date, and it takes, what I would say is it takes full advantage of the technologies that we have.
Yes. And it supports. It doesn't overwhelm. It's really there to assist, because this is very delicate spiritual work, and it just helps amplify that for teaching.
Very exciting. Hey, and thank you for the invitation.
Sure.
And I have presented at the beach many times, and it's always a pleasure. And Kevin, I know you're up there in the booth listening. Kevin Grant, thank you. I can't thank you enough. He always makes us look good.
The A.R.E. is seeing that as they've piloted week-long training programs, they've been very successful. So I think it's a model that they want to expand, and it just sounds like what you're doing is very complementary, because it's got the element of meditation, it's got an element of regression, and it's got other elements that I think would be a lot of folks. We're both apostles for this work and the transformative power, and there's just room for all of us at the table to help birth this consciousness that the world needs right now.
Yes. You mentioned Houston Smith earlier, and I closed the book with this idea that the concept of the quickening and these spiritual experiences is to take these, as Houston Smith would say, these flashes of illumination and build them into a state of abiding light. I love that quote.
Mm-hmm.
So we dip into
that's
these.
That's a nice synopsis of what you've been talking about.
Yeah, we dip into these powerful states in meditation or in regression or in transpersonal breath work, and have these profound experiences, and then we take them along with the line upon line, precept upon precept learning, integrate that to literally live the Cayce material, the way of the Christ, and hopefully become more loving and more lovable people in that process.
Well, that's fantastic, the way that you've synthesized Cayce's work, and you've also updated it and included more, things that have happened since Cayce. So that just, I really applaud that. I think that's very, very, it keeps Edgar Cayce alive and dynamic by taking it out of a museum context and putting it into the correlations with a lot of the stuff that's going on in current times.
Well, yeah, for better or for worse, I'm a bit of a smart A. And one of the things that I hope people get out of the book too is I try and use a lot of humor so that it's interesting and tell a lot of stories, so that it's an exciting book too, and not just pragmatic or didactic, but something that people will enjoy reading. And I've been heartened to hear any number of people go, God, I felt like I was drinking from a fire hose, Greg. I had to read it a second and a third time to take it all. And I'm like going, I thought I was like slowing this stuff down, but apparently not. We cover a lot of ground in the Quickening, and hopefully it's an exciting and fun read. So it's heartening to get that feedback from the road.
Oh, good. Well, we're going to be ending soon, but I just wanted to give you a chance. Anything else you would like to share that we haven't covered?
Well, just briefly, one of the techniques in the Quickening is called transpersonal breath work.
Oh. Mm-hmm.
This is really interesting. I think most people think mystical experience is something for somebody that's studied meditation for 50 years, or if you're gifted or if you have it.
Mm-hmm.
And this technique that I've developed that's rooted in the work of Stanislav Grof, one of the founding fathers of transpersonal psychology, is called transpersonal breathwork, and it uses a yogic style breathing that Cayce actually references in the reading, and he actually did to induce his trance, kind of rhythmic diaphragmatic breathing. Combines that with really intense, powerful music, sweeping symphonic scores, tribal drumming, spiritual music from around the world, and it's done in a supportive workshop setting, in a 2-day setting, and people breathe, and I know this is hard to believe, they literally have the kind of trippy mystical experiences that people that have done LSD do, or people that have in wild ecstatic mystical states. And the kinds of people that do this are people, just everyday people off the street. And we do a lot of preparatory work, and we enter into it in a very sacred and careful and respected fashion. But people have spontaneous past life memories. They touch the face of God. They report seeing people who've crossed over. They meet Jesus. They were, so all kinds of powerful, we don't know what is going to happen.
Yeah.
We cut these people loose to spirit, and we do it in a very sacred way with lots of spiritual protection. No dark figures so far. And I've been doing this work about 10 years, and it's exciting to see that people can have profound mystical experiences. And I mean this respectfully. I know you do some work with ayahuasca.
I don't do work with ayahuasca.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I work with a shaman who does that, but we do hypnosis to do those work.
Very good. So those kinds of profound experiences can be catalyzed without those. But these are without the use of any drugs.
Yes.
But they are potentially as intense and as beautiful and as transcendent. And it's exciting to have somebody open their eyes after 3 hours in this state, ecstatic state, and think that 5 minutes has gone by, and go, holy God, who knew that I could reach something like this without LSD mushrooms?
Right. Yeah, I call it a hypnowaska. Yeah, we do. I'm doing a tour next year to Peru with a shaman, and he takes people on the ayahuasca shamanic journey. But when we work together, we use hypnosis for shamanic voyaging. So it's people. What I find the difference with ayahuasca or with hallucinogenic drugs is that they take people to a certain level, and then they throw them out the window. And then some people are prepared for that, and some people have a scary experience. Whereas what I find with hypnosis is that if you're ready for the 3rd floor, it takes you there. If you're ready for the 10th floor, it'll take you there. But it's much more sensitive to your own self and what you're ready to deal with. So it's like,
yes, sir.
Yeah.
The same thing with transpersonal breath work, because we're inducing it with breath and sacred intention and music. These experiences are sometimes very intense, but they're appropriate to the intersection between where the curve of that person's spiritual growth and what they need at a given time. And it's provided by spirit, by the divine.
Right. And like you're saying, we're wired. I mean, the drugs wouldn't work if we didn't have the receptors for them. And so it's just that we have our natural methods for triggering those receptors.
Yeah.
Or activating them.
It's called transpersonal breath work. We do it down here in Texas a couple of times a year. It is not typically an A.R.E. Workshop. I'd love for it to be, to bring it to the beach one of these days. But it's very exciting and very powerful. And people go, but is it safe? And it's like, we haven't lost anybody yet. It's intense. And what's beautiful is there's always therapists in the room as people have these experiences. So if anything does feel too intense or overwhelming, the person can literally sit up and open their eyes and breathe normally, and they'll start to recatalyze a normal state of consciousness. Well, if you're on ayahuasca or mushrooms or LSD, you're just along for the wave, buddy. You don't get to say so about it.
Yeah.
But if anything seems too much or overwhelming in transpersonal breath work, you'll come out of it just as you can come out of hypnosis, very intentionally. And so in that sense, transpersonal breath work is, and hypnosis, much more safe ways to encounter these intense states.
Well, what I really emphasize in the class, and you probably do it in your way, is that I emphasize prayer. That any transition in conscious work, it's almost like a surgeon before they cut you open, they're going to make sure it's antiseptic, and they're going to clean their hands. And so what I feel is that we create sacred space through a lot of prayer, so that it's from Scripture where if you put all things under God, work for good. And so that's where I put these kind of activities. I put it under God, and I find that they have been constructive, they're positive. And sometimes we do an intensive here, and sometimes we even cast out demons. It gets to that kind of level. And it is quite intense, but like you're saying, people feel a lot better afterwards. They really feel they've relieved themselves of whatever you want to think of a possession as, whether it's a thought form or whether it's an actual demon. It can be different things for different people.
Yeah, so I agree completely, and I love the Cayce tradition of it says, as we enter into the silence, we throw about ourselves the cloak of protectiveness that comes from the thought of the Christ. I love that imagery. It just feels
it's really so simple and it's so powerful. To me, the Christ is the oneness with God, and so it's just reminding us that we're inseparable from our Creator. So nothing that can happen, even no matter how scary, no matter what, we're connected to God, and that umbilical cord is never going to be cut.
We'll work it through.
Yes.
Hey, you got a couple of minutes for a funny story before we wrap up?
Okay, that's what we're always ready for a funny story.
Yeah, just kind of a funny place to end. And this should feel familiar to you, Peter, because you do regression work. I was doing regression at the beach, at Virginia Beach at headquarters, and we were doing it for the entire group. And as a part of my post-hypnotic suggestion, I always say, I'm going to count to 3. I'll snap my fingers. You'll feel rested, refreshed, relaxed. You'll feel really good about the work you've done. You're going to go home and sleep exceptionally soundly tonight. You're going to sleep the best sleep you've ever had in your life. You'll wake up feeling refreshed and wonderful tomorrow morning. So I'd given that suggestion, and then we finished the workshop. And then the next day I was walking along the boardwalk. Mm-hmm. For those of you that haven't been to Virginia Beach, get your butt there. It's the most amazing place in the world, and you'll have a fabulous experience at some of the workshops. But there's a boardwalk along Virginia Beach with the hotels in the background. And so I'm walking on the boardwalk, having just had my coffee, and it's about 9 o'clock in the morning. And this older woman pops out of a balcony, and she can see me, and she goes, "Hey, Gregg." And I say, "Hi." And I can't remember her name. And she said, "Boy, after what you did to me last night, I just slept like a log. You were amazing." And I can only wonder what everybody in the boardwalk thought about that.
That's a good one. People wanted your card.
I'll have what she's having.
Yeah. Good. Well, thank you, Gregg. It's been a pleasure, as always, to speak with you, and keep doing what you're doing. And I hope to see you more often here in Virginia Beach.
A pleasure to be with you, Peter, and thank you. I want to say thank you to all the A.R.E. folks out there for watching today, And thank you for your continued support of the Cayce work and what Peter and I do and other field presenters do. God bless you.
Thank you. Have a good rest of your day, Greg.
Yes, sir.